Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me today. My name's Koot. I'm the Executive Vice President for APAC here at Svitla. And I'm very excited to bring two very distinguished gentlemen into a discussion today about AI in healthcare, how we responsibly scale that. Both gentlemen based out of the US who bring immense experience in this sector. Rameez Chatni, who's the Cloudera Global Director of AI Solutions in the Pharmaceutical and Life Sciences space. So welcome, Rameez.
Thank you.
And Johann Beukes, who's the Svitla's Chief AI Officer and has been doing AI much longer than I think it's been fashionable. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us all the way from the US. Before we kick off, I just will set a little bit of a stage for everyone. Today, we want to talk about AI in healthcare and why so many companies and organizations are facing challenges when trying to implement in production environments their AI strategy, particularly around data readiness, governance, privacy, risk, workflow integration, and making that big leap from proof of concept into production and what you've got to get right beyond just the model. So today we're going to cover that with Rameez and Johann. Before we jump into it, I want to encourage you, if I can, to share in the chat your biggest challenge right now with an AI implementation. And if time allows, we might come back and pick up some of them and unpack it a little. And I also I want to encourage you to stay with us for the webinar. And to that extent, we've got a lovely special offer for those who do stay towards the end of the session today. So without further to do, let's jump into it. So the big question everyone, I think, is starting to talk about today in today's environment is our data AI ready? That seems to be the big opening question. But Rameez, I know from our conversations, the better question to ask is our data context ready? What's the difference and why does it matter for GenAI in healthcare?
Thank you, Andre. It's a very good question. I think the reframe now is we kept on asking, this questions in different shapes and sizes, right? Prior to that is like, do we have a data strategy? Do we have a data architecture? Is our data AI ready always meant? Is it in one place? Is it in tabular format? Can I train my machine learning models on this? And then when I need it in real time, am I able to access this? Is it going to be batch? Is it going to be real time? Those are the things we were asking. And suddenly you come to 2023, you get the first signs of it's no longer about just the transformer. It's about this massive large language models. And initially it was all about the model. Does the model have all the capability built into it? And it seemed like magic at first. But then gradually, as the models start getting better and better, we also started realizing that it's not about what's stored inside the weights of these models, because they will always have a cutoff date. They will not be trained on our data. It's what you can feed to the model at the point in time where you need the decision to be made. So what I mean by that is, if you look at things that are coming up, which we all hear about, Claude Code, Codex, Cursor, what is really in there? It's of course it's about the model, but a lot of it is also about what the model sees and at how much does it see, when does it see it, and what is the context. So when I say, what do we mean by context? What is the question we should be asking ourselves is my data context ready? And that means, is it stored in the right format? Is it analyzable in the right format? Is it capable of being passed into an agentic workflow at the time when I need it? And it has to be understood from multiple dimensions, which of course we'll talk about next. But that's what it means. Can I take any data. If I'm a data leader right now, can I look at my data warehouses, my documents, and can I look at this and say, can this data really go into an agentic loop right now? And if the answer to that is no, then that's where our energies have to be focused in the beginning.
But that talks very much to one of the big challenges, I think, for AI in healthcare, and that is how can you trust AI in the healthcare sphere? Um, so what has to be true about the data, uh, and what does it need to look like with structured tables and unstructured records uh, uh, for that data to be trusted, Rameez?
Yeah. So now that we set the stage that we need to ask this question about context readiness, then comes the different worlds the data live in. When we talk about structured data, it's like tables, right? We can start thinking from CSV files, but once at some point you have to get out of the CSV files, you need to go into different tables and tabular formats and data lakes and data warehouses of the world, the architectures, and it's a whole different conversation to have. But um, that's your structured data, and now you have different teams. And a lot of things you will hear about is like, well, even as humans, when we look at these data and tables, different people might be using different definitions of a metric. Maybe 30-day readmission rate. What every hospital system might be slightly checking it differently, different data points that it's measuring against. And then so how do you unify what everybody, if we cannot unify at the human level, we will not be able to unify the agentic level. So that's where the semantic layer comes in. The semantic layer, which basically says these are the tables that are important for answering a specific question, whether it's a metric or anything else. These are the primary and the foreign keys. ID in one table versus patient ID in another. Agents are not going to understand that. They need to be given that in context, right? Hey, this is patient ID and ID actually mean the same thing. Now you can sit and clean all the columns in the world and make them align and make them uniform. But if you're starting right now in the middle, probably you're going to break 10,000 other things. So what do? You try to come from the semantic side and also help the context a little bit. And then what kind of join operations you have to run to get a query to answer so that now every time an agent has to run a calculation, it's not trying to hallucinate or invent on its own. You're giving it the training wheels on the bicycle. You're giving it a little bit of training. You're giving it a little bit of context. So that's how the structured table world has to live. Then in healthcare, you have massive amounts of data which is unstructured. EHR data, fire data sets, you have patient discharge notes, you have progress notes, you have billing, you have claims, you have 10,000 different things, supply chain, which might live in CSV files. Sometimes they live in PDF files. Sometimes they live in the native format, which might look like JSON, but it's not exactly JSON. It might come out in slightly different ways and fashions, and especially documents. For that, you have to have a slightly different strategy, like how passing these ginormous amount of data sets into an agentic loop is not going to solve the problem, because even if we hear about, I have a million tokens in my context, 2 million tokens in my context, the challenge is still that the context window might be huge, but the model does not look at everything in your context window equally. And it changes every time turn by turn, which is the probabilistic nature of these GenAI tools, which makes this problem harder. But that's why now for unstructured data, what you really have to do is you need to have the metadata, the lineage. Where is this data coming from? How was it created? Especially for structured tables. But for unstructured data, you need to be able to parse them with high fidelity. And what I mean by parsing them is if you have a PDF file, PDF files were made for humans. They were not made for machines. They were not for agents. How do you get those? How do you parse those files or in a way where it preserves the hierarchy of the document, and then you're able to pass it down to an agent? So for if you're doing a demo, it's very easy. I can do just do a couple of tools from Python and get it up and running and make a great demo. But if you need to do it in production with thousands and thousands of documents, you have to have a very solid strategy, and you need a very good document extraction engine to work with it. Um, and then if you have things like the old boring stuff is still not gone away. AI does not naturally mean AI will do everything that I want without me having to do any engineering or any data analysis or understanding my data. I think that it has just shifted where you are doing it, and now you're doing it for agents. That's the difference. So now you not only have to do it the way you were doing it before, but you also need to start thinking about, for an agentic system, what is the best way in the architect, how to do it, and what architecture will I be implementing if I really want to do this. So that's where the make or break happens, basically.
Excellent. That's I think one of the things I've sort of learned over the years from is this sort of, particularly for unstructured data, when you start talking about the metadata, it needs to sort of chunk and have a hierarchical retrieval element to it. But there tends to be a limitation on how many documents can go through that. And I see that pop up regularly when you start moving to production. Why does chunk and embed sort of break, these production models?
That's the wonderful trap, right? Which we all sort of have fallen into in the beginning of when. So if you go back to 2023, yeah, it's a foundation models. They're amazing. We'll chat with them. They'll give us answers. Then it became, well, I need to make context. How do I make context? Instead of copying stuff, I do RAG. And what does vanilla RAG mean? Well, I just take my documents, I chunk them into blobs of text, I embed them, I put them in a vector database. And when the agent needs it, at query time, I just run similarity searches. The agent magically is going to search the vector database, and I'm going to get it in my context. Well, what just happened here? What happened here is now your entire agentic workflows basically became dependent on your retrieval capability. And how embeddings work is they're sort of like looking at in semantic space. What does this text mean? If I have a paragraph which talks about everything, I try to embed it, that's great, but I'll really get an average of everything pretty much. And when the time comes to search for it, cosine similarity alone will probably pull in many different things and maybe give me it might give you 50 chunks. And now the agent has to sit and reason through all of this. Right? So you now saying, even if my search is bad, I'm going to give it to my LLM. It will just figure it out. That's where hallucinations start to happen. And then as you keep increasing the number of documents, it's like, okay, well, with 10 documents, it was easy. It found that paragraph of this particular guideline. Perfect. But then, and I kept on adding more documents, different versions of the guideline. Well, it didn't find the exact guideline that changed. Why didn't it do that? Um, and you start increasing the number of documents and your error margin starts to diverge. You start getting some answers which sound very nice, but then they're not accurate. Um, and that's where just purely breaking text and embedding doesn't work, right? So then the field moved on to new approaches of chunking by instead of chunking by sentences, let's chunk by paragraphs, let's do topics, let's do headers. But then you go and parse a PDF file, and yes, you can see a header, but when it gets parsed, the header doesn't come through. So you still run into the similar mistakes. So now what happens is you have to sort of start doing things like, yes, take a paragraph, run the LLMs to maybe do a summary of that. And then also add some metadata. What page number, what topic is this, and what document name is this coming from? Attach it to the chunk, then embed it. Then finding those documents will start becoming finding those relevant chunks will start becoming easier. And then there was search, retrieval, and then re-ranking, right? So just semantic search alone is not good enough. If you want to search for a very specific ICD-10 code, try embedding that and try running it against your chunks of text. The likelihood is you're not going to find what you need. You're going to find either it's going to be gibberish. You might find the ICD-10 code sitting somewhere in one of those chunks, and you wouldn't know unless you manually sit and look for it and do a control F. What that means, but if you have to do a control F, that also means now you have to do word-based search. So you combine the two, right? You do semantic and you lexical search, combine them, do all those things. A really advanced version of this could also be knowledge graphs, right? Where you put all these information together in a graph structure, which gives you that metadata plane to walk over and then know where everything is relative to whether it's a document to a section, to a specific imaging guideline, whether MRI is the first line of imaging, whether it's an ultrasound for this specific disease type. Those kind of things are made possible because you have to mentally plan. You have to think like an agent, right? You have to think like an agent. And the more you start thinking, the more these things will start becoming obvious that how you need to organize your data. So yeah, chunk and embed sounds great. It's like spray and pray, right? That's what it becomes.
So I might throw to Johann because it's really interesting. Johann, Rameez has talked about all these different unstructured data sources now, and how we sort of starting to use different ways to try and get some sense happening here. But what are the practical steps organizations can take to make this unstructured data usable?
So you have this problem with legacy systems has been around for a while with ETL, and we call it silent ETL for a reason, because a lot of the process gets hidden. So what we typically do, and somebody asked in the Q&A, you want to take inventory, you want to understand where the data lives, who owns it, what format it's in, all the things that Rameez discussed. But you also want to make sure that you profile the data. And the reason you want to do that is we all know, garbage in, garbage out. And if you think about data specifically used for machine learning, it is different from data that you use for, like a quarterly report, for instance. If you think about nulls, zeros, spaces, to use that as an example, if I take a blood pressure measurement where a null value means not taken, a zero means the device failed, and a blank means that we skipped it, right? A model will read that as, basically the same number. It will even that out. The signal is lost. Now, if you do your ETL processes and you basically replace everything that seems like a space, a zero or null, with nulls because you're saving space, you're a good DBA, that's going to cause problems with your model. So we have other issues with the data that we need to address. Sometimes there's a signal that's lost, for instance, gender, and we derive that and we store it as a separate column as, male, female, or whatever else, we need to classify. That is not necessarily the truth. It might not be, something that is 100% accurate, but that imputed value is valuable for a machine learning algorithm. Whereas if we were to go and generate statistics like that for, let's say financial information, and we report that, that's a different standard. So it's just when you look at the data, you have to understand it. You have to take inventory. You have to understand who owns it, where it's located. And then, of course, completeness, value distribution, all of the things that we typically look at for data quality, completeness, and things like that. It's even more important when it comes to machine learning because that is how it learns. There's this, discussion that we always have where we say we don't program models, right? Like software development, we program, we write code to do it. With models, we grow it. We grow it with data. So the data better be good quality. It shouldn't be junk food. So that is kind of how you want to think about it. And then the last thing is also, I want to say, if you have any kind of data for machine learning, you need to structure it in some way to give it meaning. It could mean that, you take unstructured data, a PDF, a JSON file that's semi-structured, you extract it, you tag it, you attach metadata, and then you store it in a way that you can query it. And Rameez was saying, at the end, graph databases, is a great way to enhance the data. But, from what I've seen over the past few years, a combination of traditional, just storing the data in like a SQL database, graph database, vector database, all of that combined gives you almost everything you need for a really deep knowledge base or knowledge retrieval system that for medical uses you definitely need. So that would be, kind of a long answer to your question of how do we make it useful. It's a matter of nothing really changed. It just intensified for the machine learning.
Let me change tack now. I'm very it's very interesting topic, but it's a very detailed topic getting into the data. I'm always talking about AI is there to make a difference, and we should be doing it because we want a return on investment from that, regardless of what organisation that we're in. So one of the things that I'm keen to understand is we talk about measuring success, but I know Johann, you quite often talk about, hang on, we need the baseline first. So why is measuring after the fact such a common and costly mistake in your mind?
So it goes back to the previous discussion of nothing really changed, it intensified. And if you ask me for a software development project just to open-ended code until I think it's good enough, right? That's not acceptable. But we accept it when it comes to AI, where we start a project, we don't really know what is the measure of success. We don't have a defined, is it precision, is it recall, or sensitivity, or any of those things. And we just basically say, you know what, let's give it a time block or a budget or something and see what we can do. And I speak to a lot of people, and that's I want to say 80% of the time, the discussion that we have. So what I typically like to do is I force we sit down and we think through the process. Let's define the metrics, right? What is a pass or a fail threshold upfront? Before we do any lines of code, let's just decide that what it makes it valuable. We have to tie it in the medical business, to maybe some clinical or business outcome. There's no experiments. That's one of the things that in business, we don't do experiments with AI because they're very expensive. They can go on forever without any results. And in the end, justifying that, if you're not a company like OpenAI or those guys, it's very difficult, right? So if you don't have a target, you cannot tell if something's working. So baseline is where we start. We ask the question, how do you measure success today? If a person takes 8 hours to fill out forms, medical forms, or any kind of process, and we can reduce it by 2 hours, is that valuable? How does that convert to the cost of investing in the AI? Sometimes it's not worth it. I'll be the first one to say, not everything needs AI. So we always look at it. What's the baseline? What's the cost involved? What's the measure of success? And then the other thing is you have to measure afterwards, and you have to keep measuring, because we've had a few instances where people would implement a project and it goes really well in a proof of concept. And then when they start scaling it, they find out the cost, the token cost and a whole bunch of other things that gets involved. So the cost is a big pain point right now. It might not be in the future as much, but there's the impact, environmental, resources. So we always look at upfront, what is the impact of that in relation to the ROI?
Yeah, interesting. And Rameez, in the Cloudera world, Cloudera is well known for its data systems and the ability to capture it. From your perspective, does that make it easier to sort of measure beforehand and get that baseline?
I think the pressure that everybody is in, while data strategy, data architecture was loitering around in the background for people were talking about quality, lineage. What AI and GenAI really did was it exposed the cracks of the foundation much faster. Because before, if you have cracks in the foundation, it took humans to uncover that. Now it's AI uncovering that for you at much faster pace. And suddenly everybody's like, oh, I'm under pressure from my board. No matter who is the CRO or the CEO, everybody is calling internally saying, what is our AI strategy? Right? We have to do something about AI strategy, or we either look like we are legacy, or we look like we are not making use of AI, which is an expectation. And as Johann pointed out, I mean, unless you're a model provider, they have a very different business. Their revenues follow more than hockey stick, right? If you look at Anthropic, if you look at OpenAI, their revenue is completely based on how much of the AI pipe dream or the dream they can sell to you and how much tokens you consume. But the era of just pay $10 cents for a workflow is going away. Once these major model providers IPO, the pricing will look very different. So I think that hopefully will automatically force people to come back to the ground again and ask this question: are we spending too much money on AI without even knowing what success looks like? And the other question is, do you really need AI? It's a wonderful point Johann brought in. And within AI, do you really need Gen AI? If you have an explainable random forest that can do something for you, a deterministic model that can do something I mean, anything. I mean, even if it's a Bayesian model, do you really need to put in Gen AI there? Do you really need to bring a probabilistic model with an agentic workflow? So don't do Gen AI just for the sake of Gen AI, right? Even if you're under pressure, that's what I tell either my coworkers or my customers. Like, even if you're under pressure to show AI strategy, I think part of being successful at the strategy is knowing when to apply AI at which places in your organization, and exactly be very upfront. Are you slapping on AI at the end? Most likely that's not going to succeed too much. The only way you can accelerate ROI is, like, most of the time you have to rethink the workflow entirely to really make it successful. That's where you have to be a bit brave to say, like, okay, we do it a certain way. Let's completely imagine if end to end it was an agent doing it, or a multi-agent was doing it with a human in the loop. Then you go back and say, like, okay, what does success look like? Just like one said, is it amount of time? In healthcare systems, I think it is imperative that we think about, does it matter to the patient? Does it go back and change how long patients have to wait for care? Does it change how quickly patients get care? Does it change the quality of care? Does it change clinical decision support? Does it help save on medication, supply chain side? Does it change anything on revenue cycle management? You go at the top, then you funnel down even deeper. Within RCM, what does it say? How many dollars potentially it can save? I'm not saying spend 6 months trying to derive ROI and then miss the boat. I know there's a fear of missing out is a real thing with Gen AI, but at least we spend, some time up front, take a use case, look through this with enough detail, and then go from there. So it is absolutely hard, even if you're a data platform company, like we work with customers. They have like 30 exabytes of data under management in Cloudera, but getting what is your metric, what is your KPI is always the hard part.
Excellent.
Andre,
And
can add just one
yeah,
thing. So I like this part of the discussion because your question was, does it make it easier to sort of measure beforehand? If you use something like Cloudera or one of those frameworks, and I would say 100%, because it gives you a structure. It gives you an existing process and structure, right? So it doesn't guarantee success. I don't want to pretend that's the case, but it gives you best practices. It gives you a lot of the things that you don't have to go and discover yourself, right? We have great partners like Cloudera and others, and a lot of times they're the ones that help guide us when we're working with clients. So for me, it's really valuable to know what the use cases are, but also then after that, not the first thing, but after that, pick the right tool. The second thing there, just to add, is I think when you're looking at measuring success and finding the right solution for the problem, I can't tell you how many conversations I'm in where people equate AI with language models, and I have to immediately kind of like pivot and say, let's focus on the problem first. It's the same, you find the business problems, the solutions before you go and pick the technology. It's the same with the models. So a lot of times where people, would tell us, yeah, but we can just upload it to Claude or whatever, and it can solve it. Yes, it probably can. But in production, that's not always the case. And, to Rameez's point earlier, these models aren't getting cheaper by the token. You would expect that, but they've been subsidized for so long that reality is going to kick in soon. The good thing is we have alternatives, and we've had it for quite a while. There's a lot of models in the medical field. Microsoft released a few of them that's open source, to label medical data and like ICD-10 codes, all those things. And they've been around for almost 10 years now. So they're proven, they're robust, they're free. You have to host them, but it's just, there's so many alternatives to Gen AI. So I just have to make that point.
Yeah, no, perfect. And now that you bring it up, Juan, even for, like, there are open source large language models, and Cloudera as a platform gives you that freedom that, hey, you're using Claude right now or Anthropic. or any other Anthropic models or OpenAI, you have collected all this data. You can now go back and take it to your open source models and move it to either on-prem or in your VPC in the cloud and completely run them on open source models, because now you have a benchmark against, hey, this is how a good answer looks like. This is how a bad answer looks like. And now Cloudera as a platform gives you that ability to host open source models, whether through NVIDIA or whether through Hugging Face or any of those approaches. And that just gives you more optionality, because optionality is going to be the key here. Once the price goes through the roof, the ROI calculations come back, and then how do you make it happen? You need some TCO approaches to really drive even the use cases with the high ROI. Now, to make the ROI positive, you have to find where you can save money, and this would be one approach. So thank you for bringing that up, Johann.
Yeah. And Andre, can I quickly answer? Somebody asked a question in the Q&A that's a little related to what we just discussed, if that's okay?
Go for it.
All right. So Sam was asking, how important do you think systems and architectural thinking is with AI applications versus traditional? So I want to give you guys this example because I use this just to kind of explain the difference fundamentally. When I'm building a website, it's predictable what you're getting. You're going to have a shopping cart, a search bar. You know exactly what you're going to get. You're going to click through it. If we switch over and you'd ask me, to detect cancer with 99.99% precision, I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know what the computation cost is going to be. There's so many unknowns that I have to have a very strict process around that. Now, typically, we would do proof of concepts, and I know a lot of people are pushing against that because you hear that, that's where people stop. But if you go and look at the reasons why they stop in the proof of concept, it is exactly because of architecture and other platform decisions. Not the only reason, but it's a big reason. If you're building a weekend project, vibe coding, right, and you're able to prove out something works, it doesn't mean it's going to scale. I've been on many projects over the years where that's been the case. And I'll give you one example that's not medical related, but it proves the point. We had to do a proof of concept for a insurance company where we used computer vision. Back in the day when neural networks were cutting edge, right? What's that, 7-8 years ago? And it was a weekend project. We were able to identify dents and all kinds of stuff on one vehicle, one color. Come to scale that, we found out that there's different trim levels, there's lighting conditions, there's camera complexity with the angles of the cameras and the resolution. There's so many things that we didn't even think about. And we learned our lesson. We learned that, that proof of concept better be well architected for production. You have to have a very clear path to production. And it happens with GenAI as well, where, somebody would use Opus, like the latest or the model that just came out today. I can't remember. I don't know what the name is, but they just released another model today, right? Somebody would build something that's spectacular. It works perfectly. And then when they put it in production, they find out the cost is just enormous. So my point is, when you build any kind of AI application, I think it's even more important to make sure that upfront, your architecture, and it's not just infrastructure, like, are we hosting it in the cloud or whatever? I'm talking about the model architecture, transformers, neural networks, all of the, like Rameez was saying earlier, I'm old school data science. If you give me a Bayesian model, I actually have shoes with the formula printed on the shoe because I love Bayesian logic. So to me, a lot of those old traditional algorithms still work really well, especially in the medical industry where you have structured data or semi-structured data. And what you're really doing is you're predicting trends, you're predicting clusters, you're predicting things that we've been doing for a while. That language models is not necessarily the greatest, choice for that, transformers specifically. So I hope that answers the question, Sam. I know we deviated a little bit, but I think it's a very valid question.
Great. Thanks, Johann. Obviously, one of the big things in health, and I've talked to a number of clinicians and a number of people in the health industry, is this real sense of, but it's got to be 100% accurate, right? It's got to be as accurate as we can make it. And then I know in the technology world, we talk about two things. We talk about confidence and accuracy. So, Johann, what's the difference here? What are we trading off when we talk confidence versus accuracy? help the non-tech people in the room understand the differences here, because I think it's an important part when you start to think about AI in healthcare, and what is the one you want to get right.
That's a very important point, because we, just in general discussions, will use those things interchangeably. And I don't necessarily want to talk to somebody about, hey, we need to have precision, recall, accuracy, and all those things, unless I can connect it to what's the ROI. If we get a model, and I'll use an example that is 55% accurate, but it shaves off 2 hours out of an 8-hour day, is that valuable or not? So to me, it's always important. What is that model the definition of confidence or accuracy? What does that translate to in real world impact, right? So just to answer your question, if we look at like a 95% confidence, that is a self-reported score. It's not a promise. It basically doesn't mean it's right 95 out of 100 times, right? Confidence is not accuracy. A model can be very confidently wrong. If you think about LLMs, we've seen it hallucinate, right? I remember when I was in graduate school, our professor told us this example, and he said, where do you think the president is? And everybody's like, Washington, in the United States. And then he asked, okay, where's the president's left arm? And we're like, with the president, we know the president has 2 arms. However, that leap, 10, 15 years ago, AI couldn't make that leap. You had to train it that a human has an arm attached to them and a human could be a president. You had to have a full ontology of the world for AI to understand and answer basic questions like that. Now, that was 10 years ago. The problem right now is that is a very blatant error. But a lot of the errors we get in the language models is not that very obvious. Unless you're an expert in the field, you're not going to catch it. It's the same as Wikipedia. If I read Wikipedia about a topic I know nothing about, I'm not going to catch the errors because it was written by somebody that seems confident. So what we have to do with these models is we have to have some kind of calibration check, right? Does 95% confidence actually map to being 95% right all the time? I'll be honest with you, most of these raw models are poorly calibrated. They're not necessarily well calibrated in that sense. So you have to have like a handout set. And I use this example a lot. In data science, machine learning, AI, what we typically do is we take 100% of the data, divide it in very specific subsets, like 80%, 20%, could be random, it could be other ways that we measure or split it up. And that holdout set, the model never sees. It's never going to see that. It will only see it after it was trained. And it's like when you studied for your SATs or your university entrance exams, you never saw the questions unless you cheated. So we're not talking about cheating. We're talking about in the real world, right? So if you then go and take the exam, you should get the same questions. And if you studied really well on the previous set of questions, you should perform pretty well in the new questions that you saw. That is how we calibrate these models most of the time. There's other ways, but that's like the basic way to do it. So you have to do that. Now, sensitivity, specificity is a dial. It's not a fixed point, So if you turn the one up, the other one goes down. If you have high sensitivity, you catch everything. And that's really good for false positives. It's good for if you do screening or triage. It's better if I catch something than if I miss it. High specificity only flags when it's very sure. You're going to have more false negatives, and that's dangerous if you miss real disease, right? So, depending on the use case, if you ask me, what should a model's measure of performance be? I'm going to turn back and ask you, what are we using it for? Because based on what we use it for, we're gonna tune those dials to either sensitivity or specificity. And then the final thing is, trust comes from showing the trade-off, right? When we talk about, with a clinician about what that trade-off is, it's important. It's like when they get trained in medical school, and I have no experience with medical school, I just know this example. You don't want to tell a patient that there's a 95% chance that you don't have cancer versus, there's a 5% chance that you have cancer. Which one is the better way to phrase it? I mean, those are the kind of things that you want to give to your medical professionals so that they have the right information and they can, with their training, present it the right way.
Excellent. So it does raise a question, if we have to spend time training models, and there's lots of point solutions out there now that you can purchase, are you better off buying multiple, potentially 50, 60 different point solutions, or are you better off building something where you have to spend all this time training? Walk me through what the pros and cons are of both options. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that every day I'm in that discussion, almost every day, right? So when you buy, you have commodity capability built in, so that's something that everybody probably wants. You get a mature vendor, hopefully, and not a startup, especially in the medical industry. But there's also no real differentiation, right? It all kind of has to fit unless you pay for professional services and you customize it. And then you have to really think, was it worth for the, if you customize it a lot, did you really need that vendor-based version? I like platforms. So I always, I'm not going to build platforms unless I need to. So for me, Azure, AWS, Cloudera, Snowflake, I mean, you name it. Those are platforms. They're not tools that I'm going to replace. But if you ask me very specific implementations, then I will ask the question, if that point solution is solving the right problem for me. So you want to build it when it touches proprietary data, for instance, or there's a workflow that becomes your moat. And we had a discussion today about this. I was at a conference last week and it clicked. I don't know why. It should have clicked earlier, but it clicked for me. What it means, you guys have probably seen this sign that everybody's holding up that says SaaS is dead, right? AI is killing SaaS. And I've avoided, jumping on that because to me, it's just, one of those fear-mongering things. But I was talking to a bunch of people last week, and there's three things that typically around AI solutions that you need. You need proprietary data. You need to have a model that extracts information from the data, because data is not information. Data is just the data, the raw data. So you want a model, some proprietary model, not an open source, not a base model, something that you trained on your data. And then the third thing that clicked for me was you want to have proprietary workflows. Like, for instance, if you're a physician or you're a medical professional in a very specific industry, there are certain steps that you go through that's unique to what you do, right? And it doesn't mean AI is going to replace all the steps, but the workflow could be automated, and the human, instead of them having to do all the work to get to the decision point, can use AI to get recommendations. And then the human decides. And you see that with cancer screenings these days. The doctors aren't looking at all the x-rays. They're looking at a subset of x-rays that AI kind of sorted and filtered for them. So if those are the things that you're looking at, the proprietary data, you're looking at proprietary algorithms, and then having a model that extracts that proprietary information, to me, that's just custom. You're not going to go and buy something that's off the shelf that's going to do that. And then also, at a portfolio level, you have to think about not tool by tool, but you have to think about what is our goal as a company, as an organization. I'm going to use a non-medical example, but in my early career, I worked for a boss that told us, I worked for Office Depot, and he told us our prime directive, our primary mission in life is to sell pencils, not to write software. So if we can buy it, we're going to first look to go and find and buy it. So I'm definitely leaning to buy first, and then if we really have to build when it means there's value.
Okay, excellent. And Rameez, we might just last question for you before we throw open to the Q&A. But to me, am I thinking right here? If you do buy a point solution, is the guardrails and governance sort of already built into that model, or is there further things we need to do around that guardrails and governance, regardless of whether we're building or using a point solution?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think this is excellent points. I think the build versus buy discussion always comes in because there will be some things where buying will always be the right solution, right? Because if you're looking for a very specific stroke detection algorithm, a company that lives and dies because it can detect stroke, whether it's cerebral or hemorrhagic stroke. And if you get enough signal that they have seen a lot of the data out in different clinics through different scanners, they probably have the diversity of the data that you need to train a highly accurate model for stroke detection. Maybe buying that as a solution is good. But now, if you talk about workflows, stroke detection is just one part of the flow when the patient comes into the ER, right? If you suspect a stroke, you have to still take the data from the EMR, from letting know, hey, if you detect a stroke, you need to alert your neuroscience, not the neuroscience, the neurology team and the stroke team, and reschedule the OR to go in and maybe do a thrombectomy because that's what you were supposed to do. Maybe that is something you'll have to build custom on a platform, right? Because that's very specific to the systems that you own and run in the hospital. Now, if you talk about governance and guardrails, I think governance itself is a huge topic. But I think governance really means knowing where the data is coming from, knowing who owns the data, the lineage of this data, and even when you mix and match with other data sets, because the proprietary angle really comes from there. It's not all the knowledge does not live in one source of data. You really get the knowledge when you blend multiple data sources together and you get that complete picture. So you need to know what are the ingredients of this great dish that you are supposedly making. What are the ingredients? Where do they come from? And then guardrails is a completely new, relatively newer topic in an agentic AI world, right? Now it's more about, before the attack surface was, does Rameez have access to this table? If he doesn't have access to these tables, go and ask the IT team. He'll get a service account, and that's great. We were building our role-based access control for humans. Now we're talking about agents. So does the agent impersonate the user, or does the agent have its own set of permissions? And how do you audit that? How do you log that? And how do you alert on that as well? Maybe put another agent for that, right? That's what a lot of SaaS companies will also tell you. And then the guardrails are not only at the level of, is it coming at the type when you're typing something? Is it when the workflow begins? Is it PII detection? Is it PHI scrubbing? Or is it something when you ask multi-turn questions, there is a risk that the agent can expose something that it was not supposed to expose. So the deep in the weed kind of guardrails. So there are tools which are very opinionated in terms of how the guardrail should work, but then it totally, depending on what you're trying to do, you might need a custom solution even for guardrails. So that's the thing, right? And you have to look for systems which are either open source, B, which let you define guardrails at multiple levels, not just give me the data for Rameez. Well, you are not allowed to see this data, so it is not even going to hit the query layer, versus I get to Rameez as like medical condition through like different questions, and somehow get that into the context of the agent, and the agent just spits it out, right? So there's the attack surface has just increased beyond what we can comprehend at this point. That's what I think, right? And that's why you have to be very upfront about how you think about guardrails.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Rameez. Thank you, Johann. That really good session. Really enjoyed it. For our audience, please, we'll do some Q&A right now, and I'd encourage you to pop your questions into the Q&A box. Whilst you're giving some thought to that, let me talk a little bit about the little gift that we mentioned up front. I mentioned up front that we have for you while you're thinking about your Q&A. What we would like to offer all the attendees today is if you have one AI initiative or a workflow question where you would like to pressure test with the experts here at Svitla and Cloudera, where we're offering to do an AI use case review with you. And you can scan the QR code there and to take it. Now, in doing this, we won't use any patient data, any critical data. It's a genuine review of what your AI potential problem statement is, and whether we feel AI is a good solution to help you solve that case. Nothing more, nothing less. It's not a hard sell by any means. It is very much tap into the expertise of the people that are on the call, and they will help you take that first step to go, is this a great use case? Okay, so let's jump to the questions, and let's see, do we have any new questions that have popped in? I'm just quickly having a look here. I think I can see Sam's asked a few along the way.
So Andre, I actually have one that's very relevant to what you just talked about. So ask, and I'll read the question there. And it's from Daniel. I hope Daniel is still listening. So have you seen any healthcare facilities that implemented AI and used the findings or the findings or improvements in efficiencies to grow their staff or team instead of reducing them to make savings? So I'm going to be candid with you. The story is really that, it's very rare that you're going to see people increase staffing. However, what they are doing is they're reallocating the staffing, right? So they're going to take their savings, but it's going to be about, how can we reallocate into other areas and then increase, if we increase those areas, human resources, increase quality, throughput, or other things. And I'll give you an example. So there's a company I don't think I can mention, but basically what they did is they went and they used predictive analytics to cut the length of stay to save let's say 5%, right? The equivalent of additional patients that they could have beds without physical expansion. That gives them the opportunity to reinvest in more transfers, surgical cases, stuff like that. Here in the States, I don't know if you guys have it all over, but we have these billboards with hospitals that shows you wait times, for instance, right? They're proud to show, your stay is short or long, whatever the measurement is. But behind the scenes, for them, it means more patients seen, less patients with no beds, things like that. So indirectly, they're, I would think it stimulates the industry and there's more hires, but very rarely have I seen just the use case being, let's just, hire more people if we can use AI. That's not the talking point you're going to hear. There's another use case that I remember that I read about, and I can't remember, I think it was somewhere in Texas or so, where they basically used their OR capacity without adding additional staff with the same team, and they used AI for that. So it's just, there's definitely areas, and I would reference like Ernst & Young has a bunch of surveys out there. If you want to go and do a little digging, they'll have case studies with a little bit more of where's AI returns on investment. A lot of times I look at those as well.
Excellent. I think I've got another question here from Sam. I mean, it's a really interesting one because I think it talks to the heart of what we see as Svitla. But the question here is, are we seeing any market momentum towards smaller domain-specific models, or are LLMs dominating for the foreseeable future? Interested in both your perspectives, Rameez and Johann. Maybe start with yourself, Rameez. What's your perspective around this one?
So I think, yeah, go ahead.
Go Rameez, go ahead.
Okay. So what I think happens is first is the honeymoon phase, because you get the OpenAIs and the Anthropics and the massive for frontier lab models. The expectation is, what, I can just get my problem solved with this. And how do I do it? Let me go to my cloud provider and see if they can give me a API key. It's in the VPC. It's probably going to keep the data. I mean, if you are strictly on-prem, and you have to be on-prem depending on where you're located in the world based on the local AI data and AI rules, the options are lesser. But if you're talking about if you can send the data to the cloud, people try to solve them right away. But then the realization comes in, and then you start asking these questions like, well, do I really need to do this? Is the cost blowing up? Do I really need to use a frontier model for everything? That's the cutoff that you have to make right away. And that's where you will start seeing like even small llama models, small Mistral models, if you're in Europe, or even probably in Australia as well. Due to sovereign AI and governmental AI restrictions and controls, that's where you start seeing those kind of models show up, especially if they have to be multilingual. That's You will start seeing these very specific models that are still LLMs, but they're dominating. But as we talked about earlier, right? If you just would have to do ICD-10 code detection from your text, you don't necessarily need even a small LLM for that, because even a small LLM is going to cost you more time and pain versus just running a very specific transformer, little BERT-like models. That will be much easier to deal with, and potentially you can run them on CPU as well. You don't necessarily, if you give up a little bit of latency, you can run BERT-like models on CPUs. Whereas the moment you step into the LLM game, you have to automatically start talking GPUs and those kind of things. So it totally depends on whether you're on-prem, whether you're in cloud, how long is the honeymoon phase. All of those things come into play. But generally, people start because getting API keys is easy and fast. They always rush to that first.
Excellent. Johann, what's
Yeah.
your perspective here?
Yeah, so I can tell you, to me, I'm seeing this not just in medical, but I'll talk about medical for a second. I see this in all the industries, a focus on, very specific models. And the reason is, if you think about the frontier models, they're good at everything, but they're not great at anything specific. We think they are because we're using it for generic use cases, perhaps. But if you get specific, they're not that great. So I'll use Microsoft as an example, just because I'm more familiar with a lot of their models. Some of them are open weight, some of them are open source, and there's a difference. And some of them are closed source. There's also, as of June, I read a paper the other day. Like the Mayo Clinic in the United States, they have a frontier model that is very specifically geared towards, healthcare purpose. I don't know the specifics yet, but that would be also going through Microsoft and be distributed. So in general, what I see is that the frontier models, if we talk about language models and stuff, they're very good for very quickly experimenting, proving out something that you want to see if it's, a prototype that you want to do. But for production use cases, it's always going to be something that's very specifically trained. One of the best ones that I've seen out there is, I think, Met Image Insight. It's got image embeddings. It's encoded across X-rays, CTs, MRIs, clinical photography, a whole bunch of stuff, right? And it's open source. And you can get it through Azure, or you can, go and put it on your own servers. Now, I might be wrong. I think it's for research only, or development or research, one of those two. But that's fine. A lot of those open source models gives you the ability to prototype and test. And then, if you get the data sets, train your own model. And that's what we see. We see, especially in the medical field, that it's so specialized that you need these specialized models. It's the same in the legal, for legal uses. Microsoft, IBM, OpenAI, and I think Anthropic, they all have versions of their models specifically for those industries. And that just tells you why. I mean, it's the fact that it's specific. I remember, and Rameez, maybe you're old enough like me, when we were younger, in AI and data science, there was this whole concept of specialized models, right? Expert models. That concept is coming back. Expert models could be smaller, they could be more precise, they could run on proper hardware that you can actually manage, and you're not paying millions of dollars to train. So it's just we're kind of coming back to that realization of what the purpose is, and not just throw everything at language models.
Yeah, I think the probabilistic nature is what throws us off, because we are used to deterministic failures. Something doesn't work, it doesn't compile, gives an error. Whereas in agentic and LLM-based systems, the error is so graceful, it almost looks like truth.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. There's one couple of questions we didn't get to there. We will aim to get back to you individually on those. Just conscious we're at time today. Thank you again, Rameez and Johann. I really appreciate your time, and And for all those that joined, I thank you for joining us. I hope you found it informative. If you want to stay in touch, please do so. We would love to connect with you. And all of us are very passionate about what AI can do and how it can potentially help the health industry, not just deliver better health outcomes, but to do it in a much more cost-effective arrangement and manner, given the pressure that an ageing population in the Australian market has. So please do feel free to connect with us, and thank you again for joining us today. I think we'll close the webinar now and go from there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.